Tatiane Spitzner, a 29-year-old lawyer from Guarapuava, Brazil, became a symbol in the fight against domestic violence following her tragic death on July 22, 2018. Her case drew national attention, highlighting systemic failures in protecting women from intimate partner violence and underscoring the urgent need for societal and legal reform to combat gender-based violence effectively. Tatiane Spitzner was a woman celebrated for not only her professional accomplishments, but also for the profound and lasting impact she had on the lives of those around her. As a dedicated lawyer, she was deeply committed to the pursuit of justice, and her passion for helping others was evident in every aspect of her life. Known for her ambition, resilience, and compassion, Tatiane was the embodiment of the type of person who works tirelessly to make a positive difference in the world. Born and raised in the serene city of Guarapuava, located in southern Brazil, she grew up in a close-knit community that cherished her bright, inquisitive nature. Her family and friends often recalled her as a curious and determined child, always eager to learn and excel in all her endeavors. From a young age, Tatiane displayed an unwavering dedication to her studies and a natural ability to lead. She thrived academically, earning top marks, and quickly became known as a bright and driven student, with a relentless desire to improve herself and the world around her. Her achievements were not just a reflection of her intellectual ability, but also a testament to her determination to make a meaningful impact in the world. Tatiane's decision to pursue a career in law was rooted in her belief in the transformative power of justice. She was drawn to the idea that the law could serve as a vehicle for change, particularly for those who had been left voiceless or marginalized by society. Throughout her career, Tatiane became deeply involved in causes related to human rights, equality, and social justice. She was passionate about advocating for the vulnerable, those without a voice, and was dedicated to ensuring that fairness and compassion prevailed in her community and beyond. She viewed her legal profession as more than just a career. It was a platform to help effect meaningful change in a society often plagued by inequality and injustice. In every case she took on, Tatiane sought not only to achieve a positive legal outcome, but also to foster a sense of dignity and hope for those who had been wronged. Her aspirations went beyond personal success. Tatiane envisioned a future where she could leave a lasting legacy, one that would continue to inspire others long after her own time. Tatiane's marriage to Felipe Manvailer, a biologist and university professor, began like a fairy tale, filled with romance and shared aspirations. Their whirlwind relationship seemed to be built on mutual admiration and love, with both partners appearing to complement each other perfectly. Felipe's academic achievements and charm made him a seemingly ideal match for the ambitious and accomplished Tatiane. To those around them, the couple's life appeared idyllic, marked by affectionate gestures and plans for a bright and promising future. However, beneath the surface of their seemingly harmonious marriage, troubling dynamics began to emerge, gradually revealing a much darker reality. Friends and family would later recall subtle warning signs of Felipe's controlling behavior, which initially manifested as seemingly harmless actions. Over time, these tendencies escalated, creating a toxic environment that began to erode Tatiane's sense of autonomy and self-worth. The once vibrant, outgoing woman her loved ones knew and admired began to withdraw, her energy and confidence dimmed by the weight of her circumstances. Despite her growing isolation, Tatiane maintained a brave facade, hiding the full extent of her struggles from even her closest friends and family. The depth of her suffering remained obscured until it culminated in the horrific events of July 2018, exposing the grim reality of her marriage to the world. The events of July 22, 2018 marked a devastating and harrowing turning point in Tatiane Spitzner's life, a moment that would become forever etched into the public's consciousness, largely due to the chilling security footage that captured the terrifying final hours of her existence. The evening began with what appeared to be a seemingly innocuous verbal disagreement between Tatiane and her husband, Manvailer, as they sat in their car. However, this small altercation quickly escalated, revealing the deep simmering rage that Manvailer had been harboring beneath the surface. As tensions mounted, the disagreement spiraled out of control, transitioning from words to physical violence. The footage from security cameras painted a haunting picture of Tatiana's visible distress as Manvailer struck her repeatedly, disregarding her desperate pleas for him to stop. The nightmare was far from over when the couple arrived at their apartment building and the violence spilled into the parking garage. Surveillance footage from this location revealed a heartbreaking scene. Tatiana, overwhelmed by fear and desperation, tried in vain to distance herself from her abuser. The footage shows her trembling and attempting to break away, but he dragged her back toward the elevator, his grip unyielding and forceful. The confined space of the elevator only worsened the situation, amplifying the horror of what was about to unfold. Once inside the elevator, the cameras continued to record the brutal assault that took place. Manvailer's actions were nothing short of violent and calculated. He struck Tatiana again, his blows delivered with brutal force. He restrained her, overpowering her every attempt to fight back, her cries for help filling the confined space with a sense of terror and desperation that was both heartbreaking and chilling. Her voice, filled with panic and anguish, echoed against the walls of the elevator, yet no one could come to her aid. The sheer intensity of the assault underscored the depth of the control and violence Manvailer had over her. Despite Tatiana's desperate attempts to defend herself, each struggle to escape was met with overwhelming resistance. She fought not only for her life, but for a sense of freedom she would never again experience. The violence, both physical and emotional, escalated with each passing moment, leaving Tatiana shattered in ways that were not just visible in the bruises on her body, but in the sheer terror that consumed her every action. The cameras recorded the harrowing truth. This was not a moment of self-defense. This was the culmination of a pattern of abuse that had been escalating for months, perhaps years. When they finally reached their apartment, the confrontation culminated in Tatiane's fatal fall from the fourth-floor balcony. Manvailer would later claim that she had jumped in an act of despair, but forensic evidence and the preceding events painted a far more sinister picture. Her injuries, the sequence of events captured on camera, and expert testimonies all suggested that Tatiane had been pushed. Meanwhile, additional footage showed Manvailer frantically returning to the elevator, attempting to clean bloodstains and remove traces of his actions. His desperate efforts to cover up the crime, combined with his subsequent flight from the scene, revealed a chilling disregard for the life he had taken and the pain he had caused. This night, captured in excruciating detail by security cameras, would become the cornerstone of the case against him and a haunting reminder of the devastating reality of domestic violence. Following the incident, Manvailer fled the apartment in a state of panic, desperately attempting to evade justice by driving away from Guarapuavo. His flight for freedom, however, was short-lived. Approximately 340 kilometers from the scene of the crime, fate intervened when he was involved in a car accident. The crash was severe enough to immobilize his vehicle, but it was the police who arrived shortly afterward, swiftly apprehending him. In what seemed like a final attempt to escape his past, Manvailer was taken into custody and charged with femicide, a specific legal term in Brazil reserved for the killing of a woman due to her gender. Femicide laws are intended to send a clear message that gender-based violence will not be tolerated, and Manvailer's arrest was a significant step toward seeking justice for Tatiane. During the investigation, Manvailer steadfastly maintained his innocence, adamantly claiming that Tatiane's death was not murder, but rather a suicide, insisting that she had voluntarily jumped from the apartment's balcony. His claims, however, were quickly dismantled as the evidence mounted against him. Forensic experts conducted a thorough and detailed examination of Tatiane's injuries, concluding that the marks on her body were consistent with the effects of a violent push rather than those of a fall. The physical evidence made it clear that this was not a case of self-inflicted harm. Further damning evidence was uncovered in the form of security footage from the apartment building, which revealed a disturbing pattern of escalating violence. The footage captured Manvailer's erratic behavior leading up to the incident, with several recordings showing his abusive actions toward Tatiane, ultimately refuting his claim that her death was accidental. In addition, witness testimonies from neighbors and others who knew the couple provided further corroboration of the prosecution's case. Behavioral analysis confirmed that Manvailer's actions were consistent with those of an abuser, and it became increasingly difficult to argue that Tatiane's death was anything other than a premeditated act of violence. With this overwhelming evidence, Manvailer's attempts to maintain his innocence were met with skepticism, and the case began to take a clear and tragic shape. Tatiane's untimely death sent shockwaves across Brazil, a country that already grappled with deeply concerning rates of femicide and domestic violence. Her case sparked widespread outrage, as her story resonated deeply with people across the nation. The release of the security footage, which graphically exposed the physical and emotional abuse she had endured at the hands of Manvailer, served as a wake-up call for many. Advocacy groups, passionate activists, and ordinary citizens were united in their demand for justice, rallying together to ensure that Tatiane's death would not go unpunished. What had been a private tragedy for one family quickly became a public rallying cry for change. Demonstrations erupted across major cities, with protesters taking to the streets to voice their outrage at the pervasive culture of domestic violence. Their message was clear: stricter enforcement of domestic violence laws, improved protection for women, and comprehensive support systems for survivors were urgently needed. The rallies gained momentum as more and more Brazilians began to question the societal structures that allowed such brutality to occur behind closed doors. The national discourse shifted as people demanded real reform, not just justice for one woman, but for all women who had suffered in silence. In addition to the demand for justice, Tatiane's death brought to light the glaring deficiencies in the implementation of Brazil's Maria da Penha law. This law, which was enacted in 2006 to combat domestic violence and provide protections for women, was intended to offer stronger legal penalties for abusers and establish support mechanisms for victims. However, as Tatiane's case demonstrated, the law's application was inconsistent at best. Advocacy groups pointed to the law's widespread failure in providing adequate support to women who faced violence in their homes. Shelters for survivors were underfunded, and the enforcement of protective measures was often lax, leaving victims vulnerable to further harm. Despite the law's existence, social stigma and cultural biases often led to the dismissal of domestic violence complaints, leaving women like Tatiane without the necessary legal or emotional support to escape their abusers. As the case garnered national attention, it became a pivotal moment for activists who were calling for systemic changes. They demanded not only that justice be served for Tatiane, but also that the broader issue of domestic violence be addressed, with meaningful reforms to prevent similar tragedies from occurring in the future. It was clear that for the Maria da Penha law to have the intended impact, greater commitment was needed at all levels of government and society to protect women and break the cycle of abuse. They created a mandate for reporting and reported bureaucratic abuse, calling the U.S. tax collectors. The trial of Felipe Manvailer began in 2021, nearly 3 years after Tatiane's tragic death, and it captured national attention. The prosecution meticulously laid out the evidence, weaving a narrative of escalating abuse that culminated in Tatiane's violent and untimely death. Central to their case was the damning security footage, which documented the horrifying sequence of events leading up to Tatiane's fall. Forensic experts testified that her injuries were consistent with being pushed rather than falling voluntarily, dismantling Manvailer's claims that Tatiane had taken her own life. Witnesses, including neighbors and acquaintances, recounted incidents of controlling and abusive behavior by Manvailer, corroborating the prosecution's argument that Tatiane's death was the tragic culmination of a long pattern of domestic violence. The defense, in stark contrast, sought to cast doubt on the evidence, arguing that Tatiane's fall was an act of suicide born out of despair. They attempted to highlight inconsistencies in witness accounts and challenge the forensic findings. However, their arguments were repeatedly undermined by the overwhelming weight of the evidence. Tatiane's family and friends took the stand, offering heart-wrenching testimonies that not only refuted the defense's claims, but also illuminated the vibrant, loving person Tatiane had been before her life was consumed by fear and manipulation. Their accounts brought a human element to the proceedings, reminding the court and the public of the devastating personal loss behind the headlines. After days of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict in May 2021, finding Manvailer guilty of femicide, assault, and procedural fraud for his attempts to tamper with evidence and flee the crime scene. The court sentenced him to 31 years, 9 months, and 18 days in prison. a sentence that was seen by many as a rare but significant victory in the fight for justice in cases of domestic violence. While no punishment could undo the pain endured by Tatiane's loved ones, the conviction sent a powerful message about the consequences of gender-based violence. It also served as a moment of reckoning, forcing Brazilian society to confront the pervasive and deadly reality of intimate partner violence. Footnote: the death of Tatiane Spitzner reverberated far beyond her immediate circle of family and friends, becoming a symbol of the urgent need to address domestic violence in Brazil and around the world. Her story, captured so graphically in security footage and recounted in courtrooms and media outlets, ignited widespread outrage and spurred calls for systemic reform. Documentaries, podcasts, and investigative reports delved into the case, using it as a lens to examine the broader societal and institutional failures that allow abuse to persist. Advocacy groups and women's rights organizations rallied around Tatiane's memory, using her name as a rallying cry to demand change. Here is Luis Felipe Manvailer's emotional account, marked by regret and grief. Sitting in front of the camera, his face was tear-streaked, his voice shaking as he recounted the tragic night. That night, it all spiraled. We argued, like before, but I lost control, he admitted, pausing to wipe his face. I loved Tatiane. She was everything to me, and I destroyed her. When the interviewer brought up the security footage, Luis's gaze dropped, his voice trembling. When I saw it, I didn't see myself. That man, he looked like a monster. I can't believe what I did. He hesitated when addressing his initial claims that Tatiane had jumped from the balcony. At first, I thought she jumped, he said softly. But the evidence, it shows something else. Maybe I pushed her. I don't know anymore. I can't trust my own memory. When asked why he fled the scene, Luis broke down completely. I panicked. I didn't know what to do. I thought I could escape it, but you can't escape what you've done. His voice cracked as he continued, visibly overcome with emotion. In response to what he'd say to Tatiane now, his tears flowed freely. I'd tell her I'm sorry. I'd beg her to forgive me, but I know I don't deserve it. I failed her. I'll carry that forever. The interview ended with Luis consumed by his anguish, a haunting reminder of the devastating consequences of his actions. One of the most significant impacts of Tatiane's case was the renewed attention it brought to Brazil's alarming rates of femicide and domestic violence. Despite the existence of the Maria da Penha law, which was designed to protect women and punish perpetrators, enforcement has been inconsistent, and resources for victims remain inadequate. Tatiane's case became a symbol of these shortcomings, sparking debates about the need for better training for law enforcement, expanded access to shelters and legal aid, and increased funding for prevention and intervention programs. Her story also highlighted the cultural attitudes that normalize or excuse abusive behavior, prompting calls for educational campaigns to address gender inequality and promote healthy, respectful relationships. The public response to Tatiane's death was not limited to policy discussions. Her life and tragic end inspired countless women to come forward and share their own stories of abuse, breaking the silence that often surrounds domestic violence. Support networks and online communities dedicated to helping survivors grew in size and influence, creating spaces where women could find solidarity and resources. In this way, Tatiane's legacy became a beacon of hope and resilience for those who had suffered in silence, demonstrating that even in the face of unimaginable loss, change is possible. The fight to end domestic violence remains an uphill battle, but Tatiane's story has left an indelible mark on the movement. Her name has become synonymous with the pursuit of justice and the urgent need to protect women from harm. As Brazil continues to grapple with the epidemic of femicide, Tatiane Spitzner's tragic story serves as a powerful reminder of the urgent need for action. Her life, once filled with promise and a commitment to justice, was cut short by violence that reflects a widespread crisis in the country. Her memory has become a rallying cry for change, inspiring calls for stronger protections, better enforcement of domestic violence laws, and greater support for survivors. Through the courage of her family, the determination of advocates, and the resilience of survivors, Tatiane's legacy lives on as a symbol of hope and justice. Her story has ignited a nationwide movement to fight for a future where no woman has to endure such pain, reminding the world of the importance of equality and the collective responsibility to create a safer, more compassionate society. If you like the content, please like, subscribe, and share the video with others. See you in the next video.